It is the last day of 2021. Hallelujah. And we have quite a surprise for you. Well, it's probably not really a surprise because I've been asking you all week to send me your questions and your intentions for 2022. So today is the day that I am going to reach into our mailbag. I'm going to answer all the questions I can and find out your hopes for 2022. I cannot wait. So let us jump into it. Our first question is from Fangirl. Hey, Fangirl. Would you ever run for public office? Yeah, I would run for public office if it was a part of a larger strategy to build and wield power for my folks. I right now concentrate on supporting people who are running for office who I believe have a progressive vision for what our communities can and should look like. And I really want to make sure that there's Black folks represented. But I never support Black folks just because they're Black. I support Black people who have a progressive vision for what can happen in our communities. Now, I am a Black person with a progressive vision for what can happen in our communities. And like I said, if there was a strategy and a team that I was working with to get a bunch of us in office so that we could move a strategy to wield power, I would definitely be up for it. Keep me in mind. Next question. Thank you for being my North Star. This is from Sad Girl, who identifies as they and them. Thank you for being my North Star. Every week, you teach me how to be in the world and understand it. You keep me afloat. I lost a 10-year partnership around the same time as you this year, and it broke me. My question is, how do you heal a broken heart? Also, will you be appearing publicly before you leave the Bay? The people want to know how we can give you the proper send-off you deserve. You are deeply loved, and you will be missed. Well, Sad Girl, I appreciate you. And I will say I have been all up in my feels these last couple of days because my move is approaching closer every single day. I'm not sure if I'll be appearing publicly before I leave the Bay. And by publicly, I mean, am I going to organize a public event? I don't know. It depends on what my time is looking like. However, I will let you know if there is a public send-off that you can come to, because I would love it if you would come by and say hi and goodbye. Other thing you should know is that the Bay is my home, and I will be back here, child. I'll be back here a lot. So don't think you're never going to see me again. You probably will run into me at the lake or, I don't know. I don't really go grocery shopping anymore. Damn these apps. But you might run into me somewhere. You never know. All right, let's get back to the task at hand, which is really talking about how you heal a broken heart. Well, first of all, I am so sorry to hear about the end of your relationship. And as you know, and as I've been very, very vocal about here on this podcast, I went through a similar process this year. And as I wrap up 2021, I've been thinking a lot about where I'm at in that transition. I don't know that I can give you any good advice about how to heal a broken heart because I am still healing my own. But I will say that the number one thing it takes is time. And that's the least satisfying answer, but it's the most truthful one I can give. I'll say that I have felt the wide range of emotions every single day for the last 6 months. And that's just been since the separation's been real. But honestly, in the lead up to the thing and the whole thing, it's just you go through the roller coaster of all of it. And it's important just to give yourself room and time to grieve. You've had a big loss and there's a big change happening in your life. And fortunately and unfortunately, you can't speed that up. You can't slow it down. It kind of has to take the pace that it takes. And in the meantime, just be good to yourself. Try not to beat yourself up. Try to look at yourself bravely, but don't tear yourself apart. That's a really important point. Partnerships end, things end, and then things begin again. And it's really, really deeply important just to give yourself some room to grieve, to be kind to yourself, to look at yourself courageously and look at what you had with this other person and just be grateful for it. even though it's painful that it's no longer happening, who would we be without it? So that's my big advice. I'll let you know if anything changes, but good luck. You're going to make it one step at a time, one foot in front of the other, one breath by breath. Whew. Okay, child. Let's go to the next one. This was a 3-part question from somebody awesome, Andrew Willis Garces, who identifies as he and him. I'm only going to do one of your questions, Andrew, because each one of your questions was so rich that I wanted to give it the time that it deserved. So this is the one that we picked. Last year, you published a book about building power by building a base. And I bought copies for a bunch of up-and-coming organizers I know. So grateful you wrote it. And shared with us some of your bedrock principles for base building. In surveying both the landscape of organizing by building a base in the last year and your own beliefs about how to do it well, which belief felt most challenged by what you experienced or witnessed in the last 12 months? What made you think, now, this is different? And which belief was most affirmed by what you saw go down? This is such a good question, and I really want to thank you for it. And I'm going to say that this year was so weirdly tumultuous because we were in and out and in and out and in and out of a pandemic. And so base building in the way I know it certainly has been upended. Couple of observations that I can make from this last year and just from our own experience of really trying to engage people closely and engage them well and consistently, is that even in a world that has gone largely virtual, there really is no replacement for face-to-face organizing. And some of the best work that I saw this year really involved people learning how to bring people together safely and not shying away from that. I will tell you that one of the biggest challenges and struggles that we had, even on my team this year, was trying to figure out, how do we balance being safe with also making sure that we're connecting with people? And I will say that something that was affirmed for me 100% is that you cannot organize people effectively from behind a computer screen. And believe me, we tried. My team used all kinds of digital tools and engagement things to try to get people out and activated. But at the end of the day, people are just not fully compelled by what you see on Facebook. They're not fully compelled by getting a piece of mail in their mailbox. What they are compelled by is having a personal relationship with the person who is asking them to take action. And so some of the best examples of organizing that I saw this year actually include the work from one of our former guests on this show, one of, I think, only 2 people to ever grace the podcast twice, which is the work of Mondale Robinson and the Black Male Voter Project. They have been doing these incredible focus groups around the country where they're bringing Black men together and having conversations about what's important to them and why. And in the process of that, right, they're building relationship, they're activating people, they're addressing people's immediate needs and asking them to imagine what it would look like if politics did the same. And so I think, folks should take a look at what they're doing and try to replicate it, child, because I'm going to say to you right now, if we're not talking to people face to face, then we're really losing out on almost everything. And in a world that has become increasingly digital, where people feel incredibly isolated, it actually matters to be in community with people. And that just doesn't happen through Zoom. It doesn't happen behind a Facebook ad. It doesn't happen behind a piece of mail. It happens by saying, you know what? I will do what I got to do to make sure that you know that you and I are connected no matter what. So that's what I'm going to offer here. And it's something that I think is going to be really important for the 2022 midterm elections. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in this podcast. Let me also say that I think the other thing that I really affirmed this year as it relates to base building is that part of what base building has to look like is also engaging in the culture war. And not doing that with Black folks from a perspective of trying to tell us what it is that we need, but instead asking us to tap into what we already know. You know, it's interesting. This week I was watching a panel conversation on Tiffany Cross's show, Cross Connection. But Tiffany was actually guest hosting for Joy Reid, who is another illustrious guest. Both of them have been illustrious guests on this podcast. And the whole conversation that they were having yesterday was about critical race theory and the way in which critical race theory has been weaponized in all of these ways to motivate and activate white voters to vote for racism, which is actually not in their interests, but still we have this deep problem in this country where, we have assigned a whole bunch of negative stereotypes and attributes and life circumstances to people based on false pretenses, and people buy into it. Now, the conversation that folks were having yesterday was really about how the Republican Party, how conservatives and how the conservative movement have weaponized critical race theory to motivate voters, and how they did so, in fact, in the Virginia election. And in the gubernatorial election, but also in the I think it's called like the Board of Advocates or some shit like that. Anywho, here's my point. At some point in the conversation, they were saying that it is actually a falsehood that the conservative movement or the Republican Party is doing really much of anything to organize Black voters. And Tiffany made the argument that the Republican Party has never really had an interest in organizing Black voters. In fact, their sole interest is in suppressing Black voters. And it brought up for me, and it brought up in the conversation, how this conversation and discussion about critical race theory impacts different groups of voters differently. You'll excuse the voting references, but this is what I think about all the time as it relates to building power, especially building power for and with Black communities. So it was interesting because in this conversation, what they were saying was, white voters, right, who were being manipulated by this conversation about critical race theory, voted to keep conversations about race out of schools. But when Black voters went to the polls, the reason Black voters went to the polls and identified education as one of their core issues had nothing to do with critical race theory, which we already know is not being taught in K through 12 schools. And if you didn't know that, well, child, we got other things to talk about. But the big point here was that actually Black voters picked education as one of their top issues because they're concerned about the quality of public education. Black voters and Black families, right, are more than half of the public school education system. And yet, when we talk about white voters being driven to the polls around education and critical race theory, well, those voters and those families don't even comprise the majority of these school districts where supposedly critical race theory is being taught, which it is not being taught. Here's my point. There is a culture war that is raging right now. And when we're thinking about building a base, we also have to contend with people's ideas about how the world works and why. And when it comes to Black voters in particular, and if you want to build a base of Black people, you have to actually understand what Black people care about. Black people don't care about critical race theory. We don't even think about critical race theory in that way. We think about critical race theory as like history, okay? But what we do care about, right, are these bread and butter issues that actually only get assigned significance when we're talking about white voters. This is a huge issue as it relates to electoral organizing, as it relates to investing in Black voters and communities of color, participating in the decisions that impact our lives, and also being activated and engaged in those issues. And as long as there is this disconnect, we are going to have a Democratic Party that focuses only on trying to win over voters who are being swayed by racist arguments, when on the other side of this are a whole bunch of voters who are being ignored, who are not being swayed by any of these racist arguments and actually support a robust progressive agenda, but nobody's talking to us. So the key lesson here is learn how to talk to Black voters, but also understand that Black voters and voters of color can actually be a critical weapon in fighting back against the culture wars that are being unleashed against our communities by the conservative movement. So I hope I gave you a robust answer, because it was a robust question, and the other ones we'll just have to come back to. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your questions. Okay, next question is, do you have advice for people in leadership roles for how lonely it often is to be a leader? I feel so isolated as a manager that I'm considering changing jobs. Advice for how to cope? Signed, Lonely Leader in the North Bay. I so appreciate this question, and I have been talking about this for the better part of 15 years, so let's discuss. First and foremost, I am so sorry that you feel lonely in this role that you're in, and I don't believe that you should have to feel this lonely. I do think that we have a culture around leadership that is incredibly isolating, that is incredibly alienating. And in the nonprofit or progressive side of things, where we're actually trying to get things done and improve conditions in our communities, this is a real challenge. It's a challenge because we're actually replicating a corporate culture inside of organizations that are supposed to be liberatory, and that are supposed to be seeking to end disparities. And so I just want to say, number one, it is really important to make leadership transparent. Now, when I say that, this is what I mean. I don't mean that everybody gets to question every single decision that you've ever made about anything. And sometimes people do that in organizations because they've never held leadership roles. So that's not what I'm talking about. And I actually would encourage us to stop doing that. But what I mean by making more transparent what it means to be in leadership is to engage more people in the decisions that you are having to make and the weight and the impact of them. You know, when I first became an executive director at the ripe age of 20-something, child, I actually hated it, because I went from somebody who came up through the ranks in the organization. I started as like a baby organizer and kind of moved my way up, and eventually I ended up at the helm of this organization. And I found very suddenly that people questioned me in a way that they had never questioned me before. I found very suddenly that people tested me in a way that they had never tested me before. And I found it so deeply toxic. So what I did to address it was address it. I actually talked very openly with my team about what I was seeing and what I was experiencing from them. And I asked them to reflect on the why. I also engaged and included them in all of the things that I was weighing as I was making decisions. I think sometimes people assume that if you're in a leadership position, that you just have all the answers off top, that there aren't things that keep you up at night, and that there aren't big choices that you have to weigh because you're responsible for them at the end of the day. One of the things I think people miss, and I include myself in this, before I ever held a leadership role, I would look at people in leadership and I would have a lot of thoughts about what I would do if and when I was ever in that position. But the fact of the matter is, I had never been in that position. And so I was looking and judging what people were doing with no basis for that judgment. Now, with that being said, once I understood from being in the role all the things that I had to weigh and all the things that the people before me had to weigh, I felt like I could be a little bit softer in supporting leadership as opposed to feeling like my default position had to be in opposition to it. Now, with that being said, I do think that it opened up more conversation about what type of leadership we wanted to practice in the organization. And I think it also encouraged other people to step up as leaders. And that is also important. As a leader, the buck does stop with you, but it doesn't mean that your team gets to shirk responsibility. If you're going to make decisions together, you're also going to hold the consequences and responsibilities of those decisions together. So I'll leave it there. I think that that's a good place to start. So, talk with your team about what it's like to be you. Allow them to ask you questions about what it's like to be you, but also explain to them what your boundaries are and why you have them and why they function that way. I think the more transparent you can be about why you're doing what you're doing, inviting them to also be in your shoes and inviting them to deliberate with you while being clear about what the parameters are, you may see some openings happen. And if you don't, well, then I think maybe that's more of like an organizational culture thing. And at that point, you should really decide, am I able to make a positive impact on this culture? Is it up to me? Do I have the power to help impact how it is that we hold leaders and leadership in organizations? And if you don't feel like you do, or if you feel like it's only on you, I don't really believe in that either. And you might want to find a place that's more suitable for helping to grow and nurture your leadership. That's it from Lady on that question. Oh, we have a couple more, and I am so excited to get into them. Here we go. Our next question. I know that you are optimistic by nature, but do you think that democracy truly is teetering on the edge of total collapse, or is that hyperbole? One of my intentions for the new year is to hopefully see Lady Don't Take No podcast live in Atlanta. Love you, Alicia. Jen Loiza. Jen, this is an excellent, excellent question. And let me start by saying democracy is truly teetering on the edge of total collapse. And that is not hyperbole. Look, y'all, I've never been as scared about this as I've been in these last couple of years. We've never seen a true democracy in this country. So I have to start by saying that. But we do know what the parameters should look like. And even those very weak parameters are being whittled away every single day as we speak. And some of that has to do with increasing corporate influence on our laws and governments. And a lot of it actually has to do with the way we practice democracy in this country, which is that we don't. Democracy is also very much about participation. And as you probably know, the United States has, I think, the lowest levels of participation as it relates to governance than around the world in democratic societies. What that leads to is that people don't really see the fire until it's not even smoke, right? Because we've been seeing smoke for a while, but it's like you don't even really see the fire until somebody's like banging through your walls with a pickaxe and your walls are on fire and you are dying of smoke inhalation. Not to do too much with that metaphor here, but I do want to say when we look at all the voter suppression laws happening across the nation, when we look at what's happening with the Supreme Court, when we look at what's happening with the increasing radicalization of the Republican Party and the conservative movement and their ability to take almost total power, we should be very concerned about the state of what is remaining of our democracy. And we should be fighting like hell right now for the tatters of it. You can't build a thing from nothing, right? And even though democracy is deeply, deeply imperfect right now, we have a framework, we have a house, and we need to make sure that that house gets some walls. But right now, they are trying to gut this house. They are trying to gentrify this house, and they are trying to make sure, frankly, that this house doesn't exist again. And that, my friend, is not hyperbole. Thank you for your question. And I love your intention for the new year. It's mine too. I am hoping that we can have a Lady Don't Take No live podcast from Atlanta and from a ton of other cities across the nation. So stay tuned. I know me and Phil are kind of trying to wrap our heads around this. How do we do it? Where do we do it? What's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? We got some big things happening in 2022, so we'll keep you informed. Stay tuned. Next question that we have on our list is, and this one, cha. Well, it was very kind. What is the best way to slide into your DMs? Signed, I got a crush. All right. Well, first and foremost, thank you for the question. And I don't know. I guess just slide. I don't know. I've been pretty vocal lately about how I'm not really dating right now. And that's not because I'm like swearing it off. It's just totally like a new realm for me. And so there's that. And then also I'm busy. I got a lot of stuff going on. So feel free to slide, but also come correct, because I'm going to tell you right now, while I am not dating, I have entertained some folk, and I will tell you, child, don't bring no raggedy mess up into my DMs. If you know that you are messy, if you know that you are manipulative, if you know that you are not emotionally intelligent, if you know that you be lying, if you know that you still got some work to do and you haven't really taken steps to do your work, please don't bring your shit over here. Please, please. Really, please. My heart is tender, okay? So if you're going to come in my DMs, bring something to the table, because I know I definitely do. Other than that, slide away. Next up on the questions list, I'm like, shit, was that honest or what? It really is. Like, please don't bring me any bullshit. I really don't need it. Like, for real. Okay. Next question on the question list is, what did you think of the Insecure finale? Specifically, what are your thoughts on Issa and Lawrence getting back together? Well, child, I first want to say I freaking love this show. I love Insecure. I loved Awkward Black Girl. So shout out to Issa Rae. Girl, you really did a thing. You really did a thing. And thank you for doing it for us. Thank you for doing it for the culture. Thank you for letting us see ourselves in real ways. These weren't like hella bougie ass Black people in sororities and fraternities. No shade to the Greek organizations, but these were like Black folk. And I liked it. I liked what you brought to the table. And I liked how messy characters were. And I liked how, their lives were a mess. I think it really just reflected like what it means for us to try to navigate the world. With that being said, I was not feeling the finale. I wasn't. I really the fuck wasn't. And I'm just going to keep it a buck. Thank you for giving it to us. But I got to just be clear about a thing. I really, I wasn't rooting for Issa and Lawrence. I really wasn't. I was actually rooting for Issa and Daniel. I think Daniel really had something to bring to the table. And I felt like Lawrence was still messy as shit. All the way up to the end, child. Like all the way up to the end. So yeah, maybe he got his shit together, but most likely it probably took him a lot longer than that. I also thought, Lawrence broke some trust, and it just never did it for me, child. So that was it for me. I didn't think their connection was that deep. I really thought Daniel was somebody who, they had spark, they had fire. Daniel seemed like he could just really give the business to Issa, like in all the ways. And I really wanted that for her because her life was such a mess. She should at least be having good sex, honey. And then I also felt like her and Daniel actually shared interests, right? Like I never got the sense that Lawrence gave a shit about social justice. I never got a sense that Lawrence gave a shit about really anything. I felt like Daniel was like deep into his music making. I feel like he would have been really down with what Issa was doing and it would have influenced him. And yeah, I wanted that to happen. So yeah, there's that. I also will say one character that I think just didn't get their due was Tiffany Dubois. Like we had a whole season where Tiffany was like post postpartum depression and all the shit. And then that just like went away. And then she just like, moved to Colorado in like a completely white community and didn't have any kind of breakdown because she was already kind of fragile, honey. And then the last episode, she's pregnant again, and we're just not going to talk about that. Like, I thought it could have tied together a little bit more. But like I said, Issa, thank you for doing it for the culture, sis. I really appreciated it. And this is also another show that I will binge watch. Last question for today. This one is from our guest, Mondale Robinson, one of the only guests, as I said, to appear on the podcast twice. And the question is, what path do the Democrats have for a 2022 victory when they show up with Black folks' needs in the trunk of a 1972 Buick? Ooh, well, first of all, Mondale, thank you so much for the question. And it's a very important one. I'm going to keep it a buck. I don't think Democrats have a path, but I think we have a path to power. And I know in our conversations that you and I have had, you have talked a lot about how we should reclaim the party. It's ours anyways. We're the ones who power it. We are the engine of it. And I deeply believe that. And the Democrats don't have a path without us. So I think that we should start thinking about us as an us, and approach the Democratic Party in that way. With that being said, as we come to 2022, we know what has to get done, and we finna do it. But I do think that we need to be better about leveraging our power with the party, not just for the party. And that is something that I think as a movement, we really have not coalesced around. We have had some, really progressive folk try to take over inside of the party, but we actually need a coordinated strategy because here's the deal. Black folks are progressive by and large, but that's not how we describe ourselves, and that is not how we see ourselves. And those folks that are doing those takeovers, they don't reflect us. Like, they just don't, right? And so I'm not clear, right, that those takeovers without a base reflects the strategy that we need to move forward in order to win. So with that being said, I think we can upgrade our car. I definitely think we need to upgrade our car. And I also think we need to start dropping folks off. We literally need to start dropping folks off. Like, actually get the fuck up out my car. You ain't acting right. Don't play with my fucking music. I didn't ask you to change the channel. When you in my car, it's my rules. That's how I feel like we should be rolling. And the 1972 Buick ain't that bad if it's cherried. But anyways, we're going to come back to that another time. Mondale, thank you for your question. And actually, is this even a real question? You already know what we need to be doing here. Folks definitely should check out the work of the Black Male Voter Project and make sure that you support. Also, did we mention that Mondale is running for mayor of Enfield, North Carolina? So if you haven't supported yet, check out Mondale on Facebook at W. Robinson. Also, check out mondaleforenfield.com. All right, my loves, that is it. Thank you so much to everybody who sent me a question. And thank you to everybody who listens to and supports our little pod that could.